Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome to the webinar tonight. My name is Fergal O'Keefe and I'm from MS Ireland. The webinar series is called The Unspeakable Bits. And this month, our theme is MS Money Matters. We'll be talking about the planning of the 3 stages of life with MS, with a panel of professionals covering financial planning, relevant law and social issues. So just to let you know, we invite you to send in questions, and just you'll see at the bottom there's a Q&A section for questions. So to use that and not to use the chat function. And then I'll be feeding Trevis questions, and we'll try to get through as many as we can throughout the webinar. So I just want to introduce our guests tonight. It's Ruth Henley from Henley Finance. We've got John Fatty from Fatty Solicitors and Kat Kershaw from MS Ireland, Northwest Dublin community worker. So I'll hand you over to our host now, Trevis, for the evening, and we'll start now. That's okay. Hey, Trevis.
All right, Fergal, thank you very much. And hello, everyone, and welcome to this next edition of the Unspeakable Bits from a Life with MS. I'd certainly like to thank MS Ireland for their support and for giving us this platform to delve into the topics that were once, and if we're honest, are often still considered taboo. But they're real and they're important, and they're a part of living with getting over, getting under, and around the challenges of life with a chronic disease, particularly life with multiple sclerosis here in Ireland. As those of you who have been with us for a while know that we don't shy away from the difficult topics or the questions here on the program. Personal finances being one of those I suppose, cross-cultural taboo topics. MS Money Matters fits the bill quite nicely for Unspeakable, we think, and we hope that you do as well. As Fergal said, we invite you to type in your questions into the Q&A box. What we're going to try to do here is kind of divide life with multiple sclerosis into 3 sections, sort of. We're going to talk about the early days, what used to be maybe called the prime of life days, but the prime earning days, certainly. And then the, I'm calling it the fast forward days, and we'll get into that. So, so Kat and Ruth and John, thank you so very much for being here. And I suppose that perhaps a good idea would be to remind our international listeners that, and we thank you for joining us from all over the world, that while some of the specific programs and funding schemes that we talk about here tonight will be relative to Ireland specifically, most jurisdictions will have some form of equivalent program or services of which you might be able to avail. But general finance subjects such as wills and savings and investing and that sort of carry on, those are pretty much universal generally. So Kat, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. As community work for MS Ireland, you're in the field most days working with people with multiple sclerosis. How often do you hear about financial issues and concerns from people in our community? And what might be some of those most common questions or concerns that you hear in the money matters realm? And not to put too much pressure on you here, but we're probably going to base a lot of our discussion off what you say.
No pressure. No, I think it's a great question, because I think money really does dictate this world, and it's on a lot of people's minds. And I think when you're diagnosed with MS, even more so, it changes the way you think about your future and your career and how you're going to go about the rest of your life. So I think it's a really important topic. What I would say is that we deal with it weekly, if not daily. And like MS as a disease, everyone experiences it so differently. So I would say the same about money. Everyone's financial situation is so different. And so I think that kind of influences the type of questions and situations that I deal with. They're so different. And I think that's just really important for everyone to remember, is that, your situation is personal to you, and to go looking for answers and to work out what's best for you.
All right, very good. And I suppose that was really good to kind of focus in on that, as that sort of spectrum disease that MS is, and everyone's even without the disease, our financial concerns as we go through life can change, etc. MS is just in so many ways an extra burden that we're going to have to talk about. and think about. And that's what we're all here to talk about is the thinking about, because a lot of what we're talking about is planning for our futures. I always say of MS that we know that we're different because of MS. We just want to be normal in our abnormalities in a lot of ways. So hopefully everyone will feel comfortable in asking questions, because many people will have those same questions even if they don't ask them. Don't worry, we'll keep these confidential and we'll keep them anonymous, so not to worry there. As I was saying, we're going to slice up life with MS into 3 sections. I've called them the early years. Those are the kind of the 20 to 35-ish years when we're early in our careers, our families, our financial decisions, etc. The prime years, when earning potential is at its peak and we should be getting serious about our finances and thinking about the future. And what I call, as I said, the fast forward times, when due to MS, we're thinking about and acting upon aspects of our life earlier than a similar non-MS age cohort might be. So we're going to start with that early part first, and I'm going to take jobs. And most of us get money that we used to live through our employment or through a spouse who's employed, etc. The pay packet isn't the only reason that we work. We work for a lot of reasons, research shows, and we all know that. But it's a pretty big carrot indeed. John, I'm going to ask you, though the hows and whens of divulging our disease to employers, that's a topic for a whole other program indeed. I'd like to go a bit around the disclosure. What actions does a person with MS have after they've disclosed and they're working with MS when they feel like they're not being treated fairly on the job, and feel like they might be being passed over, they're not getting the same wage, they might be discriminated against? What are some of the legal actions that a person with MS has in those circumstances?
Well, I think that one has to refer to the fact that any employment generally is governed by a contract of employment. And the contract of employment sets out the conditions under which the employer has taken you on as an employee, and what is expected of you as an employee, and what you may expect from the employer. Now, obviously, people with MS are not in any way special. They're in the sense that all employees have similar rights. And just because they suffer from MS doesn't mean that they have any particularly special rights. But there is, generally speaking, in companies an obligation to treat employees in the interest of natural justice. And that means that they must be treated fairly, and that the employer must be cognizant of anything that might be an impairment on their ability to carry out their role. And the employer has an obligation to ensure that they assist them insofar as the employer can. And very often that will depend on the size of the company, what type of employment it is, etc., and what the impairment, how that might affect the person's ability to do their job. However, if a person suffering from MS was in an employment situation, as you say, felt that they were being passed over or that they were being discriminated against because of their particular condition, then there is, generally speaking, a grievance procedure whereby the employee can activate a grievance procedure, and they lodge a grievance with the employer. And when that happens, that sets in train a process that has to be gone through by the employer. And generally speaking, that will result in the employer conceding and possibly recognizing that maybe they have been remiss, and perhaps acknowledging that they need to change in order to take account of the particular circumstances. If, however, the grievance procedure isn't successful and the employee still feels that they're being discriminated against, it could then turn into a situation of what's called constructive dismissal, whereby the employee may feel that they can no longer continue to work, but not because they don't want to, but because they have been forced out, and therefore they may have grounds to take a claim against the employer either for unfair dismissal or constructive dismissal.
Speaking of this from an employment and financial aspect, I mean, that sounds like it could be drawn out and rather expensive on the part of the person with MS who's feeling discriminated against. Are the legal fees that are part of that? Is that Is that sort of a deterrent in someone taking a case like that?
I actually don't think so, because the grievance procedure is generally in-house, and it's through the human resources department within the organization. The organization may sometimes have to bring in someone from outside to show independence in dealing with the grievance, but generally that doesn't cost the employee anything. However, if obviously the situation is such that the employee feels they have to leave the employment and then institute some kind of a dismissal proceedings, unfair dismissal actions, actually, you don't need a lawyer. You can file them with the Labour Court, and they would be dealt with directly there. However, it is useful to have legal advice. A constructive dismissal case, however, is a bit different, and yes, that would involve legal proceedings, and it could be expensive depending on the circumstances.
Thank you for that, John. Kat, when we're talking about disclosure, and a question has come out, how and when, and do I have to disclose, et cetera. And that's as I said, that's a whole big other discussion to have. What, from MS Ireland's point of view, when someone is feeling discriminated against, I'm sure that you get those calls, et cetera. What advice from the patient advocacy organization do you tend to give?
We would definitely offer our support, so emotional support through that process, because as you were saying, it is draining. But we would also help them and kind of send them on to other agencies. So Citizens Information is a really great website, and they offer that kind of advice. And through there, depending where they're living, maybe onto other organisations that offer free legal advice. But I think mainly when we're dealing with that person, it's from the emotional, working through that, giving them that support so that they feel, empowered to make the right decision for them, and then advocating on to where they can find legal advice.
Very good. It's often important to feel heard when you're in a situation like that, certainly. And speaking of feeling heard, again, don't hesitate to type in a question to Fergal, and he'll pass them on for us. Ruth, since we are earning money from a job in these early years with MS, in fact, with MS, none of us knows what the afternoon is going to be like after the morning, let alone 10 or 15 or 20 years down our career path. So in those early days, when you've just got that first job and that first paycheck that feels huge after school or university or whatever, what should we be doing financial planning wise in these early days of both our career and our disease?
Well, I suppose, the first thing is, what I would say is, try and engage early on with a financial advisor that can help you, manage your money and meet your particular needs and goals. Like, a lot of people would think, oh, they need to have loads of money to engage with the financial advisor, but they can help, advise and suggest strategies, to help you reach your financial objectives, relating to budgeting and cash management or debt management, savings, investments, retirement planning, and life insurance solutions. So I suppose when you're starting out and, if you're employed, I double check to see what kind of, benefits your employer is providing, whether your employer is providing, a pension scheme or death and service scheme or covering income protection. So, become familiar with, the benefits that you might have provided by your employer. It would be always recommended to have, an emergency fund in place. So probably the first point would be, have that emergency fund in place should things go wrong. And, when you are getting your first paycheck, I suppose it's looking at, your budgeting strategies, where is your money actually going, and, making smarter decisions with your money, and avoid, making expensive, decisions, so that's what I'd say in relation to that.
So early on, as you said, a lot of people, getting those first few years, that's a weekly or a monthly paycheck that they're not used to getting, etc. We all, when we were young, we do a few, we'll call them adventurous, not silly things, because we all did them, and everyone in that will do that. Is there a differential? Do you use a sliding scale, or do financial planners and advisors in general? So someone's coming into you at 25 years old versus someone coming into you that's that's well established in their career, et cetera. When you're helping someone get started, typically, is there a bit of a different scale based on what someone is earning, or exactly how much work they're looking for, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it would be. I mean, I suppose like when someone's coming in early, they're probably thinking about, saving for a deposit. So that would probably be the first thing they'd be looking for. Or, obviously thinking about, like when someone's younger, they don't think really too much about the future. So like planning for your retirement might seem like years away. So it's really to, start saving earlier for as early as you can for your retirement, and avail of the tax reliefs available. So I suppose everyone's situation will be different, but, it's really for younger people. I suppose it's more about budgeting and making sure, that they allocate their money correctly and make smarter decisions with their money.
Very good. Thank you, Ruth. John, these are early years, but these are also the times that we're thinking about things like marriages and starting a family, maybe opening a business. In the early 20s, we'll say, or in the 20s and early 30s, is it too early to think about things like advance directives and wills and conservatorships and trusts and all that? We'll talk about it later in the program, but thinking and acting early can make a lot of difference. And one of the things that Ruth had touched on there was, we might not think about it, but I believe that people with MS we're forced to think about those things earlier, even if we're not in a place where we might feel we can act on them. So are those kinds of legal documents things that our younger listeners with MS, and when I say younger, I'm talking under 35, if they should start engaging legal professionals to have drawn up?
Yeah, well, I think a will is always a prudent thing to do. Generally speaking, if we have a lot of people, their first contact with a solicitor is when they come in to buy a house, as a young couple, say in their 20s, and we would always encourage them at that stage to consider making a will, because they've now acquired an asset. The mortgage they may take out will have mortgage protection insurance built in, so it's they will therefore have an estate should they die. Secondly, through their employment, they'll often have a death and service benefit. So they need to consider, well, how would we want that to be dealt with in the event that anything happens to one of us? And therefore, at that stage, they often will make a will. Now, whether they will address more long-term issues, like, as you mentioned, say, advanced care directives or something like that, it's probably not likely at that stage. We generally find that might come along more into their 40s or thereabouts, where they might come in and they talk about, well, if anything happens to me, I'd want to have something in place that people around me would know what needs to be done and that it could be acted upon. So things like an advanced care directive, maybe an enduring power of attorney, certainly they'd be things that might come along a bit later, I would think, in life, though.
Okay, very good. Kat, what are some of the social protection programs and entitlement schemes that, while we might not be in need of them or ready to avail of them in those early years, which we should begin to at least familiarize ourselves with? Or are there good resources or websites? You mentioned Citizens website, but anything other that you want to share there? And we can put those in the comments, and we can certainly put them on the recording of this later on as well.
Of course. Firstly, I'd love to touch on the thinking ahead, because I think if you were diagnosed early 20s, 30s, and maybe you were in a physical role, like a builder, or anything that's quite physically demanding, that you then need to think ahead, is this career long term? And sometimes those decisions need to be made quite quickly. So there's the option of maybe keeping in that sector but moving into management or admin or something, so you can stay doing what you're doing and in that industry. But I think that is definitely something that people need to consider. And then in terms of entitlement, I won't lie, the entitlement social protection system is very confusing. So firstly, I would say always look for help. Don't expect that you're going to be able to kind of navigate that on your own. Definitely have a look and do some research and stuff, but don't be ashamed to ask for help. Again, I'd say citizens information is great. You've got the MARBS, which is the Money and Advice Budgeting Agency. They're amazing. They'll look into making sure that you're receiving all the entitlements that you're entitled to. And also the National Advocacy Service. So these are great places to kind of tap into and ask for that firsthand advice. And in terms of the citizens' information, you can make appointments and go down with all your paperwork, and they'll go through it with you and help you apply. So those things are really good. But I think in terms of the top two that I see the most are the disability allowance. So that is, you're entitled to that if you obviously have a disability. And this is means tested. So that works out, takes into account your income, assets. And then the other one we have is the invalidity pension, which is based on how many PRSI contributions you've made. But I would say these are the two main schemes that I see people applying for or are already availing of. But in conjunction to that, with those two schemes, often you're entitled to other things like the fuel allowance package, which helps with electricity or gas, or the free travel, so you can avail of public transport for free. So, like I said, it's a big old thing to be looking into.
And we did have one question that was sent in when we first announced the program, having to do with I think it was a partial invalidity payment, etc. That one seems very, very confusing and difficult to get. I suppose that's when you've had to step back from full-time work into more of a part-time or casual worker role. And anything you can offer up there?
So I haven't actually heard of a partial invalidity pension, but I've heard of a partial capacity benefit.
Maybe that's the one I'm thinking.
And so that lets you go back to work, and you can come on and off this. So you can go from an invalidity pension to the partial capacity benefit. And the partial capacity benefit allows you to work X amount of hours or money and still receive some payment. So you'll be assessed on your capacity to work, and you'll be put into a category of mild to severe. And that will kind of dictate how much you can work and how much you'll receive. But that's a great option, I think, for the fluctuations of MS, being able to tap into work and then being able to, take a step back if you need to.
Okay. John, we've just got a question that's come in saying, I never disclosed on my mortgage application and my mortgage protection plan that I had MS for fear of being rejected. Will that be a problem down the road if I die? The person is 46 and they're going to be mortgaged until they're 70.
I think I can take this one, John, unless you want to.
No, go in there.
Life cover.
No, absolutely. You go in. I might throw something in afterwards.
Yeah, no worries. What I'd say is basically, I would see that as being, a problem because, non-disclosure, is when you didn't give the relevant information, say, to the insurance company, and claims can be, cancelled or not paid because of non-disclosure. So I think that's something, to look at. You could go back to the mortgage, protection provider, because it could be a case that a claim mightn't be paid. I don't know, John, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the difficulty about insurance law is that they operate on a legal principle called imbere fides, which means absolute disclosure. So if you have failed to disclose something when applying to take out the insurance that may be pertinent at a later date in relation to a claim, well, then the insurer has the right to deny the claim. However, I think it would have to be shown that the matter which hadn't been disclosed was pertinent to the eventual possible death of the person, under which the claim arose. And, obviously the death could have occurred due to some other reason which had nothing to do with their MS. So I think it could be argued in those circumstances, perhaps that the death was as a result of being knocked down or whatever, or some tragic accident, and therefore the MS wasn't particularly material in the disclosure. But the one thing I will say in my experience with insurance companies is if there's a reason that they can find not to pay out, they will certainly take that course first. And sometimes you have to challenge them, and we have done that. And we have had insurance companies have to back down where that has happened. But it's a fight.
And if probate isn't long enough. Kat, you had something there as well?
No, I just wanted to ask either Ruth or John, in that situation, would you recommend this person disclose it now?
I would, yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think rather than have it hanging out there, I think you're better off to put it out on the table now. I mean, insurers take the long view. They have actuarial tables that will tell them what the person's likely life is going to be depending on their particular circumstances. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't get your insurance. Perhaps it might mean that you get an additional premium.
Yeah. Yeah, there could be additional premium, I suppose, depending on the severity of the condition. But I would definitely disclose.
It's better to disclose now than have your family find out about it
exactly
in the unfortunate circumstances that they'd be dealing with. Anyway, Kat, we're calling this next section the prime years. MS is sometimes called the prime of life disease. I always wondered whose prime are they talking about anyway, but diagnosis used to happen between, say, 30 and 50. Now, of course, the age of diagnosis has dropped significantly because of more people are getting it, more GPs are educated about the disease, diagnostics are better, perhaps more people are getting it, etc. But this prime time, this is always a time when many of us feel that the world is moving, our world is moving faster for our counterparts, and they're beginning to lap us. This is about the time that we see most of the people reaching out to MS Ireland for help. I would expect. How do you offer support to people in this stage of life with MS? Say they've had it for 15 years or so, and they're now starting to experience a buildup of disability, a buildup of symptoms. I suspect this is when they begin to reach out to you a little bit more, or at least for more substantive sort of advice and assistance. Is there anything specific that you're hearing at this point in a person's life that might guide our conversation going forward?
I think, like you said, trying to keep up with the Joneses. How do I do what Joe's doing down the road? How do I keep doing what I was doing 10 years ago? And so I think a lot of the time we're there to listen and to help them reframe and maybe change expectations. It's a tough one, that one. Because like you said, kids, houses, how am I going to do this? Childcare. And I think with the disease, it does become a lot to try and organize.
Right. So then, Ruth, taking that into consideration, this is the time that we start making the most money. It's also the time that we end up spending the most money. And as Kat said, we're buying houses or trying to in this market. We're raising children. We're paying for educations. We are trying to keep up with the neighbors, even if we're trying not to. There's hardly enough money to make it from one paycheck to the next sometimes. So how can you, as a specific advisor, or how can a financial advisor in general help to rein in and tune up our self-discipline to make sure that we can have enough money for? None of us knows what the future is, but our future is probably a little more uncertain than the neighbors we're trying to keep up with.
Yeah, I suppose it comes down to know what's coming in and what's going out. So, like there's a good budgeting rule called the 50-20 or 50-30-20. So be like, put 50% of what's coming into the house will go on all your needs. and 20% would be like an emergency fund, savings account, and then the other 30% would be on, like, you know, your wants, like your holidays. So putting some structure on your finances would be number one. Know what's coming in and coming out, and then, you know, you can plan then after that. You know, so you really need to get an idea of what's coming in and what's going out, and where can you allocate that then.
So give me those percentages again, because I'm sure everyone is scrambling for a pencil.
So it's 50% will be on your, like, what, you know, paying rent, bills, insurances. Then 20% will be like on your emergency fund, you know, savings account. So that 20% is savings, say.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 30% will be like on, you know, your wants. So like your holidays, you know, I don't know, TV subscriptions, dining out. So to put that kind of, it's just a rule of thumb, you know, and it might need to be adjusted, you know, depending on, I suppose, in times of like high inflation, you know, you might need to adjust it. But that's a good starting point for people to put, you know, some structure in place, is what I'd say.
Okay. Thank you, John.
I think as well, as well at that time in their lives when they're maybe under a lot of financial strain, it's important. Obviously, the mortgage and keeping a roof over your head can be very important. And I think if people are finding they're running into difficulties, banks don't necessarily want to see people in problems, and they can have programs in place where they can defer payments or they can stretch out the mortgage, and they can help people in those circumstances. But a lot of people put their head in the sand and don't approach the bank in a time, and they just let payments drift. And that's when they run into problems. It's to be proactive and go to the bank first and say, I anticipate a problem, you know, can you help me here? And very often the banks will help them.
Okay. They're not the enemy. They don't make money if we don't pay. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back to you, Ruth. And one of the things that a lot of our listeners have on their minds are the long-term cost of living with MS. Even in a state like Ireland, where there is a pretty good social net versus other places in the world. Are there any specific savings or investment vehicles which can help with those potential expenses? And I'm talking about investment vehicles, perhaps that we can dip into without too much penalty, et cetera. And then I'm going to ask that same question of you, John, when it comes to legal maneuvering. Maybe we can get some help for down the road with potential needs. So we'll start with you, Ruth, as to those vehicles that might be helpful for those emergencies.
Well, I suppose kind of, you know, the most tax efficient vehicle will be the pension, you know, so I suppose your state pension will be your first pillar of, you know, planning for when your income stops. So like there's lots of, you know, tax advantages of saving, you know, for your pension, and you get generous tax relief, you know, on your contributions that are made to your pension. And then the fund will grow tax-free within the pension, and then you will get a tax-free lump sum at retirement. So I suppose taking small steps and committing to putting away a certain amount into your pension each month can help towards building up that fund. So again, when it comes to finances, there's no one fits all approach, you know, so it'll depend on your particular, you know, circumstances and work situation to advise, you know, what the best thing for you is. Like I suppose in terms of, you know, saving, you know, that you need access to money, you know, savings and investments. Like, you know, what I would say is, you know, if people do have money on deposit, you know, it is eroding over time. So, you know, you need to kind of, I suppose, put a certain amount of your money away, not on deposit, that you could put away for a certain period of time, so it doesn't, you know, erode because of interest rates and inflation. So, you know, it's really looking at kind of, you know, I suppose multi-asset type strategies, you know, to maximize, you know, your growth potential.
But is there something that's not particularly liquid, but not, you know, stuck away and you'd get penalized for taking it? Something sort of a semi-Fredo of deposits, as it were.
Yeah, there would be, like, there's different products available that would be like what's called easy access. So, you know, you can invest it, but then if you do want to get access to it, you know, there's no penalty on that. Or else there's other type products that have, a certain level of guarantee on it, and they'd have a daily liquidity on it and no early exit on it as well. So there's plenty of options available depending on, how much you need, like how quickly you need to access the funds. But really, when you are thinking of investing, it's really a minimum of 5 years, to get investment growth on it.
John, as far as any sort of a medical trust you're the expert, other type of legal structures that might be able to help someone in looking at that way that they could dip into it if they need to for health reasons later on.
Well, I suppose the typical example we'd see is where somebody is making provision in a will for a child who might have a disability such as MS. Mm-hmm. And we would recommend in those circumstances the use of a legal device known as a trust, and most likely a discretionary trust. And essentially what that means is that a proportion of someone's estate will be set aside for the beneficiary who has the vulnerability. It may be MS, it could be other types of vulnerabilities, it could be alcoholism, it could be drug addiction, there could be lots of reasons why they may want to protect the money. But for someone with a condition like MS, what you're doing there is you're trying to preserve for them the benefits they would normally receive, because as you heard, a lot of benefits are means tested. So if you leave somebody money in a trust, you can use it as a tax efficient means to have money made available for their help, be it medical expenses, be it housing expenses, etc. But it's not theirs per se. So therefore, it's not their money. Therefore, it's not taken into account in considering benefits they might otherwise be entitled to receive. And it can also be useful for avoiding certain types of taxes, like inheritance taxes can be minimized by using discretionary trusts. But you do have to ensure that the revenue will accept that the basis of the trust is to support someone who has an incapacity of some kind. And therefore, you may need to submit medical evidence to the revenue in order for the trust to be accepted for those tax reasons.
Okay, very good. Kat, I know that just recently the MS Society had a young person's event at the care center. At this point in life, people with MS might start to think about those possible eventualities. And again, I hate to talk in all these squishy terms, but like possible eventualities. Can you tell us a little bit about the care center and what somebody in this middle 30s, 40s, 50s of life should know about what it offers? I think when people think care center, they think someone who can't get along on their own, but that's not necessarily what it is. Certainly the young people who were at the event learned a little bit about that. So could you just touch on that? And then again, we'll put into the comment section, etc., how people can look into that further.
Yeah, of course. So it's, despite the name, I'd say respite actually describes it a lot better. So it's based in Rathgar, so in South Dublin, and it's a gorgeous plot of land with a 12-bed home essentially, and people can come up to 2 times a year, either for 7 days or 5 days, and just have a break, just get away from home, change of scene, maybe being around people. I know that some people come every single year, the same amount of people they've met years and years ago, and it's the girls' holiday. It's brilliant. And while they're there, they can avail of the on-site physio. I'm pretty sure we've got a hot tub. They can pop down to the shops, do a bit of shopping, have a coffee. And it's a really, really great service. And like you said, we did a young person's week. So we had 35 and under pop in, because I think when you're younger, you don't think that service is there for you. But I think at the end of the day, when you're dealing with MS, respite and rest and looking after yourself is super important. And in terms of cost, it's subsidized. So sometimes they ask for a donation. And I think it's a really great way of going on a holiday away, home away from home.
We've just got an email message sent in. How do I book in if I'd like to go there? I'm 25 and I'm wondering, are there other people my age there?
So I'm fairly sure later this year we're going to have another young person's week. So I would give them a call, put your name on the list, and then typically our reservations team try and match people up. They do their best so that when you were coming, you'd have people, you know, at your age, at similar walks of life, stages of life. And social media, I'd say give us a follow on Instagram, and we kind of post all of that up there as well.
Very good. And you said 5 to 7 days is a couple of days. Is that not in the charts there, or?
So typically is 7 or 5. Could be something we could look into.
All right.
So I'd say express your interest no matter what, and because that way you'll be the first to know.
And for those of you with MS who have never heard of it or even thought of such a thing, while I didn't go there, I was part of a beta test of a residential kind of rehab retreat week in Tralee at the Bon Secours Hospital, and I have to say it surprised me at how restorative it was to be there and avail of the physio and the occupational therapist, etc., and just to kind of take some time off to stop fighting it all, just to stop and be a person with MS and not try to fit into the world all day, every day. So it can be restorative in ways that you mightn't think it'd be. So I'm cognizant of time here, so we're going to move on to what I often call the fast forward part of life. Though we don't move quickly, the choices that we have to make seem to be years ahead of where our physical age is as we look down the road at retirement and maybe medical retirement, etc. So Ruth, I'm going to ask you a blunt question here, because a lot of people in this cohort are realizing that they're there. What if we didn't save enough?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, are in that situation. Well, if you didn't save enough, are you talking about someone who's, approached retirement, or what age?
Yeah, approaching retirement,
Yeah.
but possibly having to retire a bit earlier than they had anticipated because of MS.
Well, I suppose if there is a pension fund in place, there are kind of, I suppose, options to retire early from it for ill health retirement needs. But I suppose, like, if you don't have enough, you are going to be relying on the state pension, and then it's really looking, do you have anything to top that up? Because I suppose when you do retire, your income's, going to stop. So are there any other ways of, bringing an income in, into the house? You might need to consider that. I know, that's something, to consider.
And then as far as, just a second there, John, if we're coming to that point and we realize that, well, you know what, the way things are going, I've got maybe 5 more good years in me. We can still put away a fairly decent chunk in that 5 or 7 years. Or
yeah, I would say, like, it's never too late. 5-7 years is still, good chunk of time, and to avail of, I suppose, the tax reliefs that are available. And as you approach retirement, you can put more into your pension. So, it's based on your salary and your age. So as you approach, say, over 60, you can do like 40% of your salary into your pension and get tax relief at your marginal rate.
Okay, very good. John, you had something else there?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that when people approach 60 and plus, very often they may be at a stage where they've paid off their mortgage. And there are schemes whereby you can release equity in your home by way of going to a company who might give you some kind of a residential reversion loan or a life loan, which means that they take a percentage of your home and they own that percentage of your home until you die. But you continue to live in the property, and it frees up a bit of money for you at a time when you might need it. However, it does reduce what your estate might be when you die for your children, say. So, it's a set off one against the other, but it is there for some people that may sometimes be useful.
Yeah, like a lot of people, say they might be asset rich but cash poor. So, releasing equity from your home is a good way to, to get some additional money.
Ruth, you mentioned earlier what I would know of as like a long-term disability or I'm sorry, a life insurance that's attached to your job if you're unfortunately killed on your job. The statistics say that we're 3 or 4 times more likely to become disabled while working than to die on the job. So, is there any sort of a private long-term disability insurance that a person in Ireland can purchase?
Yeah, like, I mean, I suppose there is income protection, so that would cover your income, if you're out of work, due to accident, injury, or sickness. So, like, if your employer does cover that, that's great. But someone suffering, with MS would be unlikely to be able to get income protection, or serious illness cover. But there are other types, of plans like cancer cover, that you might be able to get, or there's another kind of it's a multi-accident type cover, so you wouldn't be able to get income protection or serious illness, but there certainly are other types of cover that you'd be able to get. And if your employer does cover it, that's a really good benefit.
Now, I know that, and the Americans will know this, if your employer has income protection insurance, we'll call it here, but that you don't pay taxes on that, then that is considered income later on. But if you pay taxes, if you pay for that, then you don't have to pay taxes on that as income after the fact. Is that the same here in Ireland?
No, wouldn't be. So say if your employer is covering income protection, you wouldn't pay what's called a benefit in kind on it. So you don't pay any tax on it, say. But when you are paid your income protection, so you'd be paid it as normal through payroll. If your employer is covering it, it would be subject to income tax. Yeah.
Okay, John, we'll assume at this point in our lives here in this 50+ zone that we've done those legal documents we've been talking about, the wills and the advance directives and that kind of carry on. But circumstances change, and those legal documents are something that can be changed when need be. But how do we go about changing them if they need to be changed?
Well, it's quite simple, really. A will isn't actually something you just make once and leave sitting in the press. You should really review your will as you go through your life and as your circumstances change. So the will that might be appropriate when you're in your 20s would not be necessarily appropriate in your 50s or 60s or even in your 70s or 80s. So I would always say to people that a will is something that you have to consider and adapt as your circumstances change. We'd often see people coming in later life to review their wills, especially when grandchildren, etc., might come along, and also to look at circumstances where maybe family members haven't, or children haven't worked out the way they thought they might, and they perhaps are going to change their will. And that's quite where there's a will, there's a relative. So we always have to remember that. But the other thing that people consider is enduring powers of attorney and general powers of attorney. So sometimes if the important thing, a will deals with everything after you die, but God forbid, before you die, you either lose your mental capacity or you become incapacitated in a way that prevents you from, say, going out as much as you might to the banks and to deal with a lot of people. And now with GDPR rules, etc., companies are very reluctant to deal with anyone unless they have a power of attorney from you to do so. So it's probably important to consider as you get older, maybe a power of attorney if you anticipate that you're going to be incapacitated, at least even physically. And if you fear and God forbid, Alzheimer's is one of the fastest growing illnesses among the over 65s in the world. So an enduring power of attorney, which would be a document whereby you can name someone who could make decisions for you in the event that you became mentally incapable of doing it for yourself. And that's something we would always strongly recommend as almost as important as making a will.
Now, is a spouse considered a durable power of attorney for something like that in the case of Alzheimer's, even without the document?
No, because each person is a legal entity in their own right. So if you don't make an enduring power of attorney, then your spouse has no greater right than anyone else to make decisions for you.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. Kat, we've got a question coming in. Is it possible to work from the care center? If a person can work remotely from home, etc., is there space that they could or any regulations against working from there, other than obviously you're not going to take loud or GDPR type phone calls, etc.? But is that something that some people do?
That's a really good question, and not one that I've come across. There would definitely be spaces too, like lounges and, rooms like that. But in terms of Wi-Fi and kind of policy, I think that's a really great question that I'd love to go and explore, and maybe we can kind of put that up afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. So for the person who asked that question, we will definitely put up an answer to that in the section on the YouTube channel once this goes up. But also don't hesitate to get in touch with MS Ireland about that. And Kate, I'm going to put you on the spot here. An email address or a website, or possibly a phone number for the call center there. Have you got that handy?
I don't have the.
That's all right. I know
type in MS Ireland, and everything will be up on our webpage.
Not a bother. Perfect. And Fergal will put that up. Now we're coming towards the end there. So what I'd like to do is ask each of you to give us, a minute or two, just kind of a bit of a wrap up of how financial planning from your wedge of this pie can be important, and why not to fear it, because I think so many of us fear finances, and we do the ostrich thing, and if we don't think about it, don't look at it, put our heads in the sand, it'll be grand. So John, I'm going to ask you to start there.
Well, I suppose what I would say is it's about, as somebody said earlier, about thinking ahead and trying to plan and in a way that doesn't frighten you and make you fearful of what might be coming down the line, because that can paralyze us and make us lead to not making decisions when we need to make them. So I think thinking ahead, taking advice. I mean, there's lots of organizations. That Citizens Advice Bureau has been mentioned earlier, MABS as well. They're fantastic organizations which give tremendous advice. I would also say a lot of solicitors will give advice for nothing. In other words, they'll give you 15 or 20 minutes free advice. And it's well worth taking. I myself am 40 years in practice. And when I distill down all the things I've learned over those 40 years, I could probably help someone in 5 or 10 minutes, which they could take a long time to find elsewhere. And very often we won't charge for that kind of advice. So I think they're the kind of things to work on. And also just one other thing, we were talking about employment situations earlier. I forgot to mention the Workplace Relations Commission, the WRC, have great guidance and great material available to help people in work relation situations.
All right, John, thank you very much for that. Ruth, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I suppose it's really, I suppose financial planning, engage with a financial advisor who'll get to know you, understand your needs and concerns, and like establish what you'd like to achieve, what your goals are, what your objectives are. Financial planning, it's not only about the destination, but it's about the journey along the way. So there's lots of techniques, to help you get to that journey and, engage, with the financial advisor. I suppose it'll give you then, you'd be more educated, you'll have more confidence about, your plans going forward. And everyone's different. So, it's really a tailored plan to your own individual situation, and that'll develop with you, I suppose, as you move through the different stages in life. So, and again, I'm available if anyone wants to give me a call for any, guidance or support, happy to have a complimentary call to chat through any questions.
It's never too late.
Yeah.
We did have a question coming in. Can you still start a pension in your 50s? Or is that too late?
No, it's not. It's never too late. It's never too late to look at these things, so yeah, I definitely reach out to, a local financial planner. The one thing we didn't, mention on the call, and I don't know, it's probably too late to get into this, but, health insurance then is another, privately, if anyone needs advice in that area. I suppose if people that are, newly diagnosed, if they're new, to the health insurance market, they'll have different considerations, or, people could possibly have health insurance, plans in place. And I suppose it's using your health insurance then, you know, to manage your health, because I know there's a lot of like complementary or alternative medicines, you know, that you can, you know, use as part of your health insurance as well. So, you know, think about that, how your health insurance could possibly help you keep, you know, manage your condition and your health and your
You're
well-being.
managing your funds then as well, because if you're not, if it's funds that your health insurance is going to pay for some of those are things you don't have to pay out of pocket then.
Exactly, because you can claim money back on them. You know, you can claim 50% back, and you know, it's it's
And it's like
important.
found money.
Yeah.
Kat, thank you, Ruth. Kat, a few final thoughts from you as a community worker who's working with MS Ireland. How do people get in touch and all of that when it comes to finances?
I think the main takeaway from tonight should definitely be you don't have to do it alone. I think John and Ruth both just then ask for help and avail of those free services. And in terms of MS Ireland, type it into Google. There's the regional services, so you'll be able to get in contact with the equivalent of me in North Dublin all around the country, and we'll get in contact and we'll be there to support you through whatever you're going through.
Perfect. As I expected, thank you all so much. Our time has gone quickly and it's come to an end. You've answered some very important questions, and there are many, many more to ask. I suspect that there could be a sequel to this conversation. Until then, however, I want to extend my greatest thanks to John Fahey, to Ruth Henley, and to Kat for your time and for your talents tonight. Don't forget to mark your diaries for our next Unspeakable Bits. That'll be the last Thursday in April. It's the 27th. The next installment, we'll be talking about MS and the great third wheel of relationships, from the challenges it presents to even stepping away from unhealthy marriages and relationships. Nothing is too difficult to talk about, and we will address all of this on the Unspeakable Bits from the Life with MS. Until then, I'm Trevis Gleason, wishing you and your family the best of health. I'll hand it over to Fergal, and cheers.
I just want to reiterate, I want to thank everybody, all our guests today. I found that really informative, and I hope people found that as interesting as I did. I want to thank you, Trevis, as well, for hosting this, and for everyone for giving up our time. And as you mentioned there, that next webinar, it's on the same time, 8 p.m. on Thursday, the 27th of April, MS and Relationships. And our special guests are Pauline Mackey, who is a relationship therapist, and Gillian O'Mahony from Lynch Solicitors. So you can check out our website tomorrow. You'll be able to register from tomorrow on our website and on social media channels. And finally, this webinar is going to go up on the MS Ireland YouTube channel. So you'll be able to, you know, can send it on to other people, or if there's bits that you want to go back on to hear about, it'll be up there as well from next week on. So thank you, everybody, again, for a great talk tonight and for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Night.
Night, everyone.